The restaurant was located on the top floor of a 5-star hotel in Munich, and from there you could see the entire city falling asleep under the first lights of the night. The tables were spaced out as if silence also came at a high price, and the silver cutlery reflected the amber light of the antique chandeliers. It was the kind of place where waiters learned to be invisible, where customers didn't look their servants in the eye, where money bought not only the food, but also the right to ignore. Helena had worked there for 3 years. She was 27 years old, with brown hair tied in a tight bun as required by the restaurant's rules, and a face that carried a discreet beauty, the kind you only notice when you look closely. But nobody looked closely at a waitress. She knew that. She had learned to exist on the margins, to smile without expecting anything in return, to say thank you to those who would never say it back. That November evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. An international business conference had brought executives from all over Europe, men in dark suits and watches that cost more than Helena would earn in 5 years. She circulated among the tables with her tray balanced on her arm, taking orders, serving wine, clearing plates with the quiet efficiency her job demanded. That's when he came in. Maximilian Brandt was 42 years old and had the kind of presence that made people straighten up in their seats. Tall, with graying hair at the temples and icy blue eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything he saw. Heir to one of Germany's largest industrial fortunes, he frequently appeared in business magazines, always with that half smile of someone who knows the world was built to serve him. He arrived accompanied by 3 other men, all equally well-dressed, all equally noisy in their restrained arrogance. They sat at the most secluded table, near the panoramic windows, and Helena knew immediately that she would be the one to serve them. It was always like this. The difficult tables, the demanding customers, the groups that would make a point of finding fault with everything. The manager knew she could handle it, that she didn't complain, that she swallowed the rudeness with a professional smile that never wavered. Helena approached the table with the menu in her hands. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said in perfect German, with the clear pronunciation she had learned on her own, listening to audiobooks in the early hours after work. "May I start by serving you some drinks?" The men barely glanced at her. Maximilian made a vague gesture with his hand, still conversing with his companions about some corporate merger, some number in the millions that, for them, was merely an abstraction. Helena waited. She had learned to wait. The patience of the invisible is not a virtue, it is survival. After long minutes, one of the men finally deigned to order a bottle of wine. Helena wrote it down, went to get it, poured it with pinpoint precision, and went back to wait for the dinner orders. It was then that Maximilian looked at her for the first time. Not in the eyes, of course. He looked at her uniform, at her hands, at the notepad, as one might assess an object. Then he turned to his companions and said something quickly and quietly in German, clearly not intended for her. "Let's have some fun," he said. "I bet she can barely read." The others laughed. It was the restrained laughter of the privileged, the kind that doesn't need to be loud because it already carries all the contempt in its subtlety. Maximilian then looked at Helena with a smile devoid of kindness and began to place his order in German, but not the common German spoken on the streets. He used the most closed Bavarian dialect, full of regional expressions, old slang, and obscure references. He spoke quickly, without pauses, expecting to see her get lost, stammer, and apologize for not understanding. Helena listened to every word. She understood every word. But she didn't answer immediately. She had learned long ago that sometimes silence is more powerful than any answer, so she simply wrote down each item of the order calmly. When Maximilian finished, still smiling with his presumed superiority, she looked up and asked, in the same perfect Bavarian dialect, "Would you prefer the sauce served separately or over the meat?" Maximilian's smile died slowly, like a burning candle. His companions stopped laughing. For a moment, there was only silence at the table. Helena didn't wait for an answer. She said she would bring the sauce separately, as was the custom of the house, and walked away with the same dignity with which she had approached. There was no triumph in her steps, no vengeance in her posture, only the unwavering calm of someone who knows her own worth, even when the whole world insists on denying it. What Maximilian Brandt didn't know, what nobody in that restaurant knew, was that Helena Novak had been born in a small village on the border between Romania and Moldova, in a house without heating where winter lasted 6 months and hunger was a constant companion. Her mother, Anna, had been a language teacher before the fall of the regime and later worked washing clothes for the wealthier families in the region. But every night, no matter how tired she was, no matter how cracked her hands were from the soap and the cold, Anna sat with her daughter and taught her. First came Romanian, the mother tongue Helena learned along with her breast milk. Then Russian, because it was necessary to survive in that time and place. Then French, because Anna said that French opened doors that didn't even exist yet. German came later, with borrowed books and recorded cassette tapes that Anna got from a former colleague. Italian, Spanish, English. Each language was a brick, Anna said, and with enough bricks you build a bridge to another world. Anna died when Helena was 17. Cancer. There was no money for proper treatment, only months of contained pain in a public hospital where patients shared beds and doctors divided their attention among hundreds of dying people. Helena held her mother's hand until her last breath, and when it was all over, she realized she was completely alone in the world. There was no family, there was no inheritance, there were only those languages, those bridges that her mother had built word by word, night after night, sacrificing her own rest to give her daughter something that no one could ever take away. Helena left. She crossed borders with dubious documents and doubtful hope. She worked as a cleaner in Vienna, as a nanny in Zurich, as a clerk in Lyon. In each city, she listened more than she spoke. She absorbed accents, expressions, the subtle cruelties of language that reveal what people really think, and she learned. She always learned. She arrived in Munich 5 years ago with a small suitcase and 100 euros in her pocket. She got the job at the restaurant because they needed someone for the night shift, the worst time, and because she said she spoke German. She didn't mention the other languages. She didn't mention anything about herself, actually. She had learned that her story didn't interest anyone, that her pain didn't fit on resumes, that her nights of studying and her years of solitude were worthless in the eyes of those who only measured value by diplomas and surnames. 3 years at that restaurant had taught her everything about human nature. She had seen couples betraying each other with glances across tables. She had heard life-destroying deals being closed between an appetizer and dessert. She had been ignored, mistreated, blamed for mistakes she didn't make. Once, a customer deliberately spilled wine on her blouse and then demanded a discount on the bill because she had ruined the mood of the dinner. The manager gave the discount. Helena cleaned the blouse in the staff bathroom and returned to the dining room. That's how it was. It was always like that. And she endured it because she needed the job, because she needed the money, because she had a small, distant dream that she kept in her heart, like someone guarding an ember under the snow. One day, she thought, she would have enough to open a language school for poor children. A place where other girls like her, born on the wrong side of the borders, could learn that words are freedom and that no one can imprison someone who knows how to communicate with the world. But that dream seemed further and further away. The rent for the tiny room she shared with 2 other immigrants consumed almost everything. What was left was barely enough to eat properly. Sometimes, on her days off, Helena would go to the public library and spend hours reading, not because she needed to learn more, but because among the books she felt less alone. That night, after the incident with Maximilian Brandt, Helena continued working as if nothing had happened. She served the dishes, cleared the silverware, smiled when she was expected to smile. The men at the Billionaire's table were quieter afterward, and she felt Maximilian's gaze following her around the room, but she didn't care. Men like that looked at everything as if the world owed them explanations. When they finally left, they left an excessively generous tip. Helena knew what it meant. It was money trying to buy forgiveness, guilt converting into notes she should accept with gratitude. She divided the tip with her colleagues, as she always did, and kept her share in her apron pocket without counting. The restaurant closed at 2 a.m. Helena changed in the staff changing room, put on her worn coat, and left through the back door as always. The November cold stung her face, and she put her hands in her pockets as she walked to the bus stop. The streets were almost deserted, with only a few drunks returning home and homeless people seeking shelter in the entrances of buildings. She didn't see the car parked across the street. She didn't see the man leaning against it, smoking a cigarette while watching her. Maximilian Brandt couldn't sleep. This was nothing new. For years, the nights had been too long. The silence of his gigantic penthouse had weighed like an accusation. He had stayed awake staring at the ceiling and wondering how he had gotten there. There meant many things. It meant the top of a business empire his father had built, and which he had expanded without ever asking if he wanted to. It meant a marriage that had ended 3 years ago, when his wife finally admitted she could no longer bear living with someone who was always absent even when present. It meant a 16-year-old daughter who lived with her mother in Berlin and who answered his messages with monosyllables when she answered at all. Maximilian had everything and nothing. It was the kind of cliché he would despise if he heard it from someone else, but it was something he experienced every day. That night, after dinner, his companions had left laughing, having already forgotten the minor embarrassment with the waitress. But Maximilian hadn't forgotten. The image of that woman, her calm face, her unwavering eyes, her voice responding in the dialect he had used to humiliate her, kept swirling in his mind like a song he couldn't stop humming. Who was she? Where had she come from? How could a restaurant waitress speak Bavarian better than many native Germans? He told the driver to wait. He stayed in the car while the restaurant emptied, employee by employee, until she came out. Small in her oversized coat, walking quickly against the wind, her head down as if she were used to not drawing attention. Maximilian threw away his cigarette and got into the car. "Follow her," he told the driver. "Not too close." The driver didn't ask any questions. Employees of Billionaires learn not to ask questions. Helena's bus was 20 minutes late, and during all that time she stood at the bus stop, arms crossed, her body trembling with cold. Maximilian watched from inside the heated car, And something about that image, that woman waiting alone in the freezing early morning while he was enveloped in luxury, tightened something in his chest that he was sure was dead. The bus took her to a neighborhood Maximilian only knew in passing when his car crossed it on its way to some better place. Old buildings, peeling facades, overflowing garbage cans. She got off and walked 3 more blocks to a narrow building where the hallway light flickered. She went inside, and Maximilian stood looking out the 3rd floor window, which lit up for a few minutes before going dark again. "So she lives here," he said aloud, to no one in particular. The driver did not respond. The next morning, Maximilian called his assistant. "I want all the information about a female employee at the restaurant," he said, and gave the name of the establishment. "Her name is Helena. I don't know her last name. She works the night shift." The assistant, accustomed to strange requests, didn't question it. In a few hours, he had a complete dossier. Helena Novak, born in Romania, 27 years old, work visa in good standing, no criminal record, no property, no registered debts. Address, employment history, even a photo taken from some old document. Maximilian stared at the photo for a long time. It was a bad, bureaucratic photo, the kind that makes anyone a suspect. But even there, in that bland image, there was something in her eyes. A firmness, a depth, something he couldn't name. He went to the restaurant that night, alone this time. He asked for a table and waited for her to appear and serve him. When Helena approached, her face showed no surprise. "Good evening, sir," she said with her usual professional courtesy. "May I bring you the menu?" Maximilian looked at her differently, no longer with his previous arrogance, but with an almost anxious curiosity, like a child facing a puzzle. "How many languages do you speak?" he asked bluntly. Helena hesitated only for a moment. 7, she replied. "Would you like to place your order?" 7. The word hung in the air between them. Maximilian had traveled the world, met presidents and prime ministers, dined with Nobel laureates and billionaires even richer than himself. And none of them, not a single one, spoke 7 languages. "Which ones?" he asked, ignoring the menu offerings. Helena sighed softly, almost imperceptibly. It was the sigh of someone accustomed to having her patience tested. "Romanian, Russian, French, German, Italian, Spanish, and English," she said. "The menu is on page 3, sir. The dish of the day is veal escalope." Maximilian didn't open the menu. He kept looking at her, at that woman who should be invisible, whom the whole of society had decided was invisible, and who carried within her more knowledge than most people would accumulate in a lifetime. "Why are you working here?" he asked. "Because I need to pay my bills," she replied, without hostility, but also without the submissiveness he expected, like most people. Maximilian opened his mouth to say something, but at that moment another customer called Helena, and she stepped away with a small, apologetic nod. He remained there seated, staring at his own hands as if he didn't recognize them. In the following weeks, Maximilian returned to the restaurant every night, always alone, always at the same table, always ordering dishes he didn't even touch while watching Helena work. The other employees began to notice, and whispers spread through the corners. The manager grew nervous, fearing that the billionaire was planning some complaint, some lawsuit, some disaster. Helena said nothing. She continued doing her work with the same dedication as always, ignoring the stares, ignoring the rumors, ignoring the man who couldn't take his eyes off her. One evening, when the restaurant was nearly empty, Maximilian called her over to their table. Helena approached, her tray balanced on her arm, her face tired from the long journey. "Sit down," he said. "I can't," she replied. "I'm working." "Please." The word seemed to cost him dearly. Helena noticed this. She realized that men like Maximilian Brandt didn't say please, that for them the world moved by commands, not by requests. She hesitated, looked around, saw that the manager was busy at the back of the room. She sat down, not out of obedience, but out of curiosity, and perhaps for something more, something she didn't want to admit even to herself. "What do you want, sir?" she asked directly. Maximilian ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture that seemed strange on him. "I want to apologize," he said, "for what I did that night, for what I said. It was inexcusable." Helena studied him for a long moment. His eyes, which had previously seemed so cold, were now restless, almost vulnerable. She had seen many rich men in her life. She had seen how they treated people they considered inferior, how they dismissed apologies as easily as discarding used napkins. But there was something different here, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why are you apologizing? Why have you been coming back here every night? What do you want from me?" Maximilian did not answer immediately. He remained silent, his fingers drumming on the table, his eyes fixed on some point beyond it. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "I really don't know. I just know I can't stop thinking about you. The way you answered me that night, the calm you had, your dignity. It's been years since I've seen real dignity in anyone. Everyone I know is trying to get something from me. Everyone wants something, but you didn't want anything. You just wanted to be treated like a human being, and I didn't do that." The silence between them stretched on. At the back of the restaurant, someone dropped a glass, and the sound echoed through the empty room. Helena thought of her mother. She thought of the nights of studying, the cracked hands, the bridges of words Anna had built for her. She thought of all the years of invisibility, of swallowed humiliation, of forced smiles, and she thought that perhaps, just perhaps, the man sitting in front of her wasn't so different from her as he seemed. "Everyone wants something," she said softly. "That's how it works. The question is what we're willing to give in return." Maximilian looked at her as if she had said something profound, something he needed time to process. Helena stood up, adjusted her apron, and returned to work. But before turning away, she turned one last time. "The tip you left that night," she said. "I shared it with the others. It wasn't just for me." He didn't reply, but when he left another tip. Smaller this time. And a handwritten note with surprisingly clumsy handwriting for someone who signed contracts worth millions. The note simply said, "Thank you for teaching me something I should already know." Helena put the note in her pocket. I didn't know why. Maybe because it was the first time in a long time that someone had thanked her for something other than bringing the right food. Days passed, and Maximilian continued coming to the restaurant, but now things were different. He didn't just stand there observing. He talked to Helena whenever she could stop for a few minutes. Small questions at first, about her work, about the neighborhood where she lived, about the books she read. Then bigger questions, about where she came from, about how she had learned so many languages, about what she dreamed for the future. Helena answered cautiously. She wasn't used to being the center of anyone's attention, much less a man's like him. But there was something about Maximilian's insistence that didn't seem predatory. It was more like genuine curiosity, as if he were trying to understand something about her, or perhaps about himself. One night, he invited her to dinner. Not there, at the restaurant where she worked. Somewhere else, anywhere she chose. Helena refused. "I don't go out with clients," she said. "It's against the rules." "Then I won't come here anymore," he replied without hesitation. "That way I won't be a customer anymore." She almost laughed. "Almost. You can't just stop going to a place because you want to invite me to dinner." "Yes, I can. I just stopped. That's ridiculous." "Probably, but it's also true." Helena looked at him for a long moment. Here was a man who could have anything he wanted, who was used to moving the world according to his will, and here he was, sitting in a restaurant in the early hours of the morning, trying to convince an immigrant waitress to have dinner with him. "Why me?" she asked. "There are thousands of women in this city, rich, beautiful women who would do anything to be with someone like you." "Why me?" Maximilian thought before answering. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual, almost intimate. "Because you're the first person in years who's made me feel ashamed of who I've become," he said. "And because when you answered in my language that night, when you showed me that I was the ignorant one, not you, something inside me woke up, something that had been sleeping for a long time." Helena had no answer for that, so she did what she did best. She continued working, serving other tables, clearing plates, filling glasses. But when her shift ended, when she went out the back door to face the cold of the early morning, she found Maximilian waiting, leaning against his car. "I was serious," he said. "I'm not going back to that restaurant, but that doesn't mean I'm giving up." "You don't even know me, so let me get to know you." The silence of the empty street stretched between them. Helena felt the cold pierce her worn coat, felt the weariness of yet another long journey, felt the weight of all the years of loneliness, and she felt something else, something she didn't want to admit. A small, forbidden desire to say yes, to believe, even if just for one night, that someone in the world truly wanted to know her. "A cup of coffee," she said finally. "There's a diner that's open all night, 3 blocks from here. Nothing more than that." Maximilian's smile was the first genuine smile she had ever seen on his face. No arrogance, no calculation, just relief. "A cup of coffee," he agreed. The diner was the kind of place Maximilian had probably never been to in his life. Scratched formica tables, fluorescent lighting that didn't forgive any imperfection, a sleepy waiter serving coffee in chipped cups. Helena ordered a black coffee. Maximilian, after looking at the laminated menu with a lost expression, ordered the same thing. They sat at a table in the corner, and for the first time since they met, they were in neutral territory. Neither the luxurious restaurant nor the cold street. Just an empty diner at 3 a.m. where nobody cared who they were. "Tell me about yourself," Maximilian asked. "The truth, not the polite version." Helena held the cup with both hands, absorbing the warmth. "The truth? The truth is that I was born in a place most people don't even know exists. That my mother died teaching me to speak to the world because she believed words were the only inheritance she could leave me. that I crossed borders illegally, that I worked in jobs that destroy the body and soul, that I sleep in a room I share with two strangers because I can't afford anything better. That's the truth. Maximilian listened in silence. There was no pity in his eyes, which Helena appreciated. She hated pity. Pity was another form of humiliation, only wrapped in good intentions. "And the languages?" he asked. "How did you learn 7 languages like that?" Helena almost smiled as she remembered. "My mother," she said. "She was a teacher before everything fell apart, before the regime, before the poverty, before having to wash other people's clothes to survive, but she never stopped teaching. Every night, no matter how tired she was, she would sit with me and teach me a new word, a new phrase, a new conjugation. She said that every language was a key, and that with enough keys I could open any door." "And did you open it?" Helena lowered her eyes to the coffee. "Some," she said. "Others are still locked up." They stood there for hours. The sleepy waiter refilled their cups 3 times, and at some point the sun began to brighten the sky through the dirty windows. Maximilian spoke about his own life, not the version that appeared in magazines, but the other one, the one hidden behind the numbers and headlines. He spoke about his father, a hard man who measured love in terms of profit and loss. About his mother, who died when he was 12 and left a void that he tried to fill with work. About his failed marriage, about the daughter who barely knew him, about the sleepless nights in the empty penthouse looking out at the city and wondering if that was all there was. When she finished, Helena said something he didn't expect. "You're lucky," she said. "You have a daughter. No matter how badly you messed things up, she's still alive. There's still a chance to fix things." Maximilian opened his mouth to reply, but couldn't find the words. No one had ever called his situation lucky. No one had ever pointed out the obvious with such simplicity. "You are different," he finally said. "I'm not," Helena replied. "I'm just someone who's learned to see things from a different perspective. When you have nothing, you realize better what really matters." The sun was already high when they finally left the diner. Maximilian offered her a ride, but Helena refused. She needed to walk, she needed to think, she needed to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. He understood, or at least he pretended to understand. "Can I call you?" he asked. "I don't have a phone, not one that works properly. So, can I see you again?" Helena looked at him for a long moment. The billionaire, the businessman, the heir to fortunes. And she saw beneath it all someone as lost as she was, as alone as she was. "I'm here every night," she said. "You know where to find me." And she left, walking against the morning sun, her worn coat looking even more faded in the daylight. Maximilian stood on the sidewalk, watching her disappear, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. A small, fragile, absurd hope. The hope that perhaps there was still time to become a better person. In the following weeks, they met many times, never at the restaurant, because Maximilian had kept his word and stopped going there. They met at the diner, or in public parks, or simply walking through the city streets when Helena had time off. He didn't try to impress her with expensive gifts or grand promises. He was simply there, listening, asking questions, learning. Helena discovered that beneath the arrogance was a man who had forgotten how to live. Maximilian discovered that beneath the reserve was a woman who had built a fortress around herself to survive. Both were damaged, each in their own way, and perhaps that was precisely what brought them closer. One night, he took her to see his penthouse. Helena resisted at first, suspicious of his intentions, but Maximilian insisted he only wanted to show her the view. And when she finally went up, when she saw the entire city stretching out under the starry sky, she understood why he felt so lonely there. The apartment was enormous, cold, full of expensive objects that no one touched. It seemed more like a museum than a home. "It's beautiful," she said, "but it's sad." "I know," he replied. "That's why I can't sleep here." They stayed on the balcony for hours, talking about everything and nothing. At some point, Maximilian held her hand. Helena didn't pull it back. It was the first time in years that someone had touched her gently, and the feeling was both strange and necessary, like drinking water after a long thirst. "I want to help you," he said. "With your dream, the language school, I can finance it." Helena took her hand away from his. "No," he said, and his voice was firm. "I don't want your money. That's not how it works." "But why? I have more than I'll ever use. Why can't I do something useful with it?" "Because," Helena replied, "I need to build this myself. It needs to be mine. It needs to come from my effort, my sacrifices, the inheritance my mother left me. If I accept your money, it won't mean anything. It will just be another thing a rich man gave to a poor woman, and I refuse to be that." Maximilian remained silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "You're right," she said. "I hadn't thought of it that way. Because you don't need to think like that. You've never had to achieve anything on your own. You've always had everything handed to you. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation." And Maximilian knew it was true. His fortune was inherited, his power was circumstantial, even his business success was built on foundations others had laid. He had never truly fought for anything in his life. He had never tasted the sweetness of real achievement. "Then teach me," he said. "Teach me how to achieve something on my own." Helena looked at him with a mixture of surprise and something that seemed like respect. "What do you want to achieve?" "You? But in the right way, in the way you deserve." Their relationship progressed slowly, slower than Maximilian would have preferred, at the pace Helena needed. She still worked at the restaurant, still lived in the cramped apartment, still refused any offers of material help. But now there was someone waiting for her on her nights off. Someone who looked at her as if she were the most important person in the world. Helena's colleagues noticed the change. She seemed less tired, less withdrawn. She smiled more, though she didn't explain why. The restaurant manager was curious when Maximilian Brandt stopped showing up, but he didn't ask any questions. Wealthy clients were unpredictable. 3 months after that coffee at the diner, Maximilian did something he had never done before. He went to Berlin unannounced and knocked on his ex-wife's apartment door. Claudia opened the door with a shocked expression. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to Lena," he said. "To our daughter." Claudia studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside to let him in. Lena was in her room, wearing headphones, completely oblivious to her father's arrival. When she saw him at the door, her face went through a series of emotions, none of them positive. "What do you want?" she asked, and her voice was a mixture of anger and indifference that cut Maximilian more than any business rejection. He sat in her office chair, looking at the teenager he barely recognized. She had grown so much. She was almost a woman, and he had lost everything. "I came to apologize," he said. "For everything. For being absent, for not knowing you, for thinking that money was the same as love. I was wrong. I've been wrong your whole life." Lena slowly took off her headphones. "What?" "I met someone," Maximilian continued. "Someone who showed me that I was wasting everything that matters. She taught me that people need to be won over, not bought. That love is built with time and presence, not with gifts and checks. And I realized that if I don't change now, I'll lose you forever, if I haven't already." Lena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Do you think you can just show up here after 16 years and apologize?" "No, I think I need to show up here every week, every month for the rest of my life, until you believe I've changed. I know it will take time. I know you may never forgive me, but I'll try anyway, because you're my daughter and I love you, and I should have said that much sooner." Lena remained silent for so long that Maximilian thought she was going to send him away. But then, very slowly, she stood up and hugged him. An awkward, stiff hug, full of years of hurt, but a hug nonetheless. When Maximilian returned to Munich, he went straight to Helena's apartment. She was off work that day and opened the door still in her pajamas, her hair loose for the first time since he'd known her. She looked beautiful like that, he thought. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with clothes or makeup or anything that could be bought. "I went to see my daughter," he said, without even going inside properly. "I said everything I needed to say. I cried in front of her, for the first time in my life. And she hugged me. Helena, she hugged me." Helena smiled, and there were tears in her eyes as well. "I'm happy," she said. "Truly." He kissed her. It was their first kiss, right there in the doorway of that cramped apartment, with its thin walls and flickering light in the hallway. And it was perfect precisely because it was imperfect, because it had nothing cinematic or grandiose about it. It was just two hurt people finding comfort in each other. The following months were spent building relationships. Maximilian began going to Berlin regularly, gradually rebuilding his relationship with Lena. Helena continued working at the restaurant, saving every penny for her dream. But now she had someone who believed in her, who was there to listen to her on difficult days, who never, not once, offered easy solutions. One day, Maximilian showed up with a different proposal. "I don't want to give money to your school," he said. "I want to invest, as a partner. You do the work, I provide the capital, and we split the profits. It's not charity, it's business." Helena hesitated. "Is this different?" "It's completely different. Charity is one-sided. Business is a partnership. You would be the owner, the founder, the educator. I would simply be the investor who believed in your potential." She thought for a long time. She thought of her mother, of all the nights of teaching, of all the bridges of words. She thought of the pride she would feel in building something of her own, but also of the reality that it would take her decades to gather the necessary capital on her own. On one condition," she finally said. "I approve of all decisions, all of them. And my name goes first, not yours." Maximilian smiled. "Done." The Anna Novak language school opened its doors 6 months later in an immigrant neighborhood where children from a dozen different countries crammed into small apartments and dreamed of futures that seemed impossible. Helena named the school after her mother and hung an old, faded photograph of Anna on the main wall, smiling with that tired but hopeful smile that Helena still saw in her dreams. The classes were free for those who couldn't afford them. Helena taught in person, sometimes late into the night, using the same methods her mother had used with her. Each language is a key, she would tell the children, and with enough keys, you can open any door. Maximilian would sometimes appear, not to supervise or control, but to help. He discovered he was good at organizing things, solving practical problems, and convincing authorities to streamline bureaucracy. And he also discovered immense joy in seeing the children's faces when they managed to form their first sentence in a new language. A year after the school opened, they got married. It was a small ceremony, without pomp, without newspaper headlines. Lena was the maid of honor. The students of the school gave a presentation, singing a song in 5 different languages. Helena wore a simple dress that she had chosen herself, and Maximilian thought he had never seen anything so beautiful in his life. In his speech at the reception, he told the story of how they met, of the request in German that should have been humiliating, of the woman who responded with dignity instead of shame, of the lesson he learned that night and that he continued to learn every day. "I was a man who thought I knew everything," he said, holding Helena's hand. "And then I met someone who, with one sentence, showed me that I knew nothing that mattered. She taught me that true power isn't in money or status. It's in dignity. It's in the courage to stand tall when the whole world wants to bring you down. It's in loving unconditionally and building without giving up. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve this woman. And even then, I probably won't succeed." Helena was crying, but smiling. She stood up, kissed her husband, and then turned to the guests. "My mother used to say that words are bridges," she said, and she was right. But what she didn't tell me, what I had to discover on my own, is that sometimes bridges don't lead where we expect. Sometimes they lead us to people we didn't know existed, to lives we didn't know were possible, to loves we didn't know we deserved. She looked at Maximilian, at Lena, at the school children who were watching with wide eyes. "I was born with nothing," she continued. "I lost my mother too soon. I crossed borders that no one should have to cross. I worked in jobs that almost destroyed me, and for a long time I thought my life would always be like this, invisible, alone, just fighting to survive. But then an arrogant man tried to humiliate me in a restaurant, and instead of feeling small, I remembered who I was, everything my mother had taught me, all the bridges she had built for me, and I responded. Sometimes, she said, dignity is the only weapon we have, but sometimes it's the only weapon we need." The school grew. 5 years later, there were 3 branches in different neighborhoods of Munich, and Helena was planning to expand to other cities. Thousands of children had passed through its classrooms, learning not only languages, but also that their dreams were valid, that their origins were not limitations, that each of them carried within themselves a value that the world had not yet seen. Maximilian changed. Not overnight, not completely, but he changed. He reduced his working hours, spent more time with his family, and learned to find joy in the little things. He and Lena finally had the relationship they should have had from the beginning, full of long conversations and shared laughter and the kind of love that can't be bought. But the biggest change was internal. Maximilian learned to see people, not as employees or subordinates or means to an end, but as complete human beings, each with their own story, their own dreams, their own silent dignities. He learned that the waiter who served his coffee had a family that depended on him, that the cleaning lady who cleaned his office had survived wars to get there, that each invisible person carried within themselves entire universes. One night, many years later, Helena found the note Maximilian had left at the first dinner. "Thank you for teaching me something I should already know." It was crumpled, faded, tucked away at the bottom of a drawer she rarely opened. She read it again, and tears came unexpectedly. Maximilian found her like that, sitting on the bed, the piece of paper in her hands. "What happened?" he asked, worried. "She showed me the ticket. Do you remember that?" He picked up the paper and read the words he had written so many years before. "Of course I remember," he said. "That was the first step." "The first step towards what? To become someone who deserved you." Helena smiled through her tears. "You always deserved it," she said. "I just didn't know it yet." They stayed there for a long time, embraced in the silence of the room, 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Not perfection, not fairy tales, just the simple and complicated truth of human love with all its flaws and wonders. Outside the window, the city twinkled with its millions of lights, and somewhere down below, a waitress was finishing her shift, tired and invisible, carrying within her dreams that no one had yet noticed. And perhaps one day someone would notice. Perhaps one day someone would look beyond the uniform and the service and see the whole human being. Perhaps. Or perhaps not. The world was like that, full of maybes, full of silent dignities waiting to be discovered. Helena closed her eyes and thought of her mother. She thought of the bridges of words, the nights of studying, the cracked hands that never stopped teaching, and she knew, with a certainty that warmed her heart, that Anna would be proud. Not because of the money, not because of the marriage, not because of the school that bore her name, but because Helena had stood tall, because she had responded to the humiliation with dignity, because she had proven, without needing to prove anything to anyone, that a person's worth is not in the circumstances that surround them, but in the essence they carry within themselves. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.